Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley McManus, Director of Marketing at Affectiva. Welcome to Affectiva Asks, a human-centric AI podcast, where each episode we will interview a thought leader doing cutting-edge work in the AI space. A little bit about us. Affectiva is the pioneer of human perception AI, software that can detect nuanced human emotions, complex cognitive states, behaviors, activities, and interactions. And Affectiva is applying this technology to advance the next generation of multimodal in-cabin sensing. Today's special crossover episode features our CEO, Dr. Rana el Kaliouby, interviewing Rob May, co-founder and CEO of Talla. During our interview, he talks to us a bit about his engineering background, his current work in the customer support automation space, and trends he's seeing as an angel investor.
Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Rob May, the founder and CEO of Talla. Hi.
Thanks for having me, Rana.
So tell us a little bit about your background and what you did before Talla.
So I actually am a hardware engineer by training. So I used to do FPGA and ASIC design. So maybe we can talk about this later, but I'm super bullish on AI hardware and where it's going as a result. And then from there, I went into like sales engineering and general management. I did an early master's degree in computer science in the mid-2000s with a focus on AI, which was symbolic logic processing in Lisp in 2004, 2005.
I remember that.
So I actually quit. I actually didn't finish it. I got about halfway through. But I followed the field for a long time. And then in 2009, I started a company, Backupify, that did backup for cloud computing applications, Google Apps and Salesforce. We grew that company to 90 people, 10 million in revenue, sold that off, and had a really good outcome. And I started thinking about, okay, it's 2015. If you're an entrepreneur, what do you look at? I looked at blockchain, IoT, AI, and corporate messaging. And I actually was drawn to corporate messaging first because Slack was really taking off. And a friend and I built a prototype for a new messaging tool, and it turned out just not to be as cool as we thought it would be. Like, we used it for a while and went, this is stupid. So shut that down and then started Talla. Talla was originally focused on the HR space. The idea behind it was I was reading some research papers on machine learning approaches to natural language processing. I'd seen what had happened with machine vision, right? You had 60 years of machine vision to get to like 70% accuracy on classification. And all of a sudden, over like 5 years, you went from 70 to like 95%. And I thought, wow, that could happen we could hit a similar cliff in language soon. And there's a lot of unstructured data, particularly unstructured text in the world. If it's going to become computable, there's a lot you can do with it. So that's what drew me to Talla. After pivoting out of the HR space for a whole bunch of reasons, we ended up in this customer support automation space. And so we now sell into companies that typically they're not looking to replace heads. They just can't hire enough. So they tend to be growing fast. They have a complex product. And they need to hire 30 support reps this year. It's a tight labor market. They've hired 8. They don't know where the rest are going to come from. And so we have an agent-facing tool and a self-service tool that they can deploy on the website that both make the agents more productive and let people get support themselves. And the difference is we don't do any search, right? It's all neural information retrieval. It's all NLP. And so we ingest content and we break it down into little chunks. And then we do a bunch of machine learning on it so that we don't give you search results. We don't give you, here's the article with your answer. We just give you the snippet that has the answer in it.
So tell me, if I was interacting with a company and they had Talla, like what would the experience look and feel like to me as a consumer?
So the experience today on a lot of websites is you go and you say, okay, we're using this microphone, right? We have this problem with this microphone. Let's go to their website and look at the problem in their search box. And what happens is you do a keyword search and 11 articles come up and we can't really tell which one it might be. So we browse through them all. We don't find the answer. So it says you didn't find your answer, open a ticket. So you open a ticket, you get an email. Somebody will be back to you in 48 hours. Like, we need to record the podcast, right? So we need the answer. So that's a really bad experience, right? What would happen with Talla is you would go and you would type in the question, you would get the answer. And you do that because we've tried to read the support documentation like a person and really break it down so that we understand it. So compared to a lot of the people in the space, which use sort of scripted bots where you just specify if somebody says this, say this back, we can just look in your documentation and see if the answer's there. And so we can answer questions we've never seen before. We can give you, less or more of a snippet depending on what you need.
And do you ever escalate it to an actual human being?
We do for 2 reasons. Actually, one of the machine learning models we have in production just says, like, should we even try to answer this question? Because a lot of things people ask are going to be performative and you need to go do a task. And so we have a classifier that says, that's an ask that's not good for us.
Right,
pass it right through. And then sometimes, you have a new product, you don't have content for it yet. or for some weird reason we can't match it or can't find it. And so we queue those up in a training portal where somebody can teach Talla. You and I've talked about annotation before. A lot of this is about getting the support agents to, as they go through their workday, to annotate the support documentation, right? Because that allows us to build better NLP models, get more accurate answers. When you try to use these off-the-shelf tools, they tend to be trained on like Wikipedia. So if your support documentation is all colloquial English, great. But if business vernacular matters for your industry, your entity recognition and all that's going to be off, right? It's going to be different than what it would really be. And so we're really good at that.
So do you get the training data, is it client specific?
It is, but a lot of times it's public. So a lot of times it's support documentation that's on their website. Sometimes it's not on their website and it's in other tools. So we ingest from like Salesforce's Index knowledge base, Confluence, Google Drive, sources like that. Most people have multiple sources, right? With product uses Confluence, support uses Zendesk Answers. Right. Some other people hack something together in Google Drive, and we have to sort of ingest all three and sort of learn across those.
And so do you have are these like generic models that you can sell to your clients, or do you end up building like client specific models?
We end up building client specific models on answers. We can do things cross client, like understand general paraphrasing, for example. And stuff like that. And then and we don't really sell them back to the client. We're more like a workflow tool. So we're trying to touch, particularly if you use the agent piece, we're trying to touch the support agent at every part of their workflow and learn from them, right? That's an interaction. You can even look at things like if they ask Talla a question and we give an answer back and they go and ask a highly related question that's more clarification, then we're like, okay, that wasn't the right answer.
Right.
So you can pick up on those little things.
So it sounds like you're doing online learning. Are these models?
A little bit, yeah. Byron, my co-founder, is very interested in imitation learning. And so we think a lot about that. But cool. There's a lot of different, I use probably 30-something machine learning models in the production system, doing a lot of different things.
And are you focused on any specific industries?
Not necessarily, because what you find is that customer support, the workflows that you have and the tools that you use tend to match your customer support philosophy for your company more than anything else, right? So it's a brand identity thing. If you believe like fast, high quality support is part of your brand, if you look at the finance industry, some of them believe that, some don't, right? If you look at the insurance industry, some do, some don't. So we don't see support infrastructure cluster by industry or even by company size. Like if you're really, really small and you have 2 reps, Talla's probably not good for you. You should be using it to build up, right? But it's not really, that's not really what it's designed for. But again, they're really big companies, thousands of employees that don't want omni-channel support, and there are some that do. And so it really boils down to that philosophy. So we look for people with complex products that are hard to understand and hard to support and service. And then markets where they typically are growing fast, they can't hire enough reps. And then the support is a big piece of the brand identity. They really, really care about it.
And are you for now focused on just text?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we get a lot of requests to do voice, which we'll probably do either through a partnership or maybe directly at some point. But
and mostly English speaking?
Yes, we do support a few different languages, and we also have some partnerships that can support more, but we're not as we don't support as many as we would like to.
So it sounds like you approach this as a human augmentation, kind of the AI is augmenting the workflow and the workspace. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I really think, I think that's how you have to build AI tools. I think it's the best way to build AI tools these days, right? For a couple of reasons. Number one, even though you could argue that long-term there's some risk that AIs are better than us at everything and they automate our jobs away, like I don't see that happening at least for the next decade, right? For the next decade, you're going to give everybody superpowers, right? So I give the example of, imagine you can have a construction worker who wears an exoskeleton and now can lift 400 pounds instead of 100 pounds and do it safely, right? And not injure his or her back. Like you're going to give those similar cognitive abilities to everybody. And I think that's really, really powerful. And then I also think, it works better because the humans can go from the humans training the machine to the machine starting to suggest things to a human, to then the machine doing a lot of work and the human doing the exception handling, right? And additional training. As example of how that plays out in Talla, when something comes in that we don't know, we can route that to a subject matter expert. But on day one, we don't know who that should be. So initially what you would see is assign this to a user. And when you click that a few times and start assigning things to people, we start to build machine learning models. Who knows about what? Mm-hmm. Then we start prompting you, should this go to Susan? Should this go to Fred? And you tell us yes or no. You click a green checkbox or a red X, right? That's training the model even more. Then we get to the point where we're 90% sure this should go to Susan, so let's just send it to her. And if it shouldn't go there, she'll tell us to send it over to Fred. So this is what's so interesting. People always ask, what's the definition of AI? And this is the definition that I always tell them is it's when you deploy a piece of software and it can learn and adapt to its environment without being programmed.
Yeah, absolutely. So how is this all going to change the future of work?
I mean, in a whole bunch of ways, right? I think you're going to see companies take on different structures, right? They're going to be leaner. You've already seen this a little bit just with IT. If you go back to and you look at revenue per employee for companies in 1980 and then in 2000 and in 2010, Facebook's revenue per employee is $2 or $3 million, I think, last time I checked. Mm-hmm. So people are getting more and more and more efficient. Because the humans are sort of moving up the cognitive stack, right? Whereas in 1980, it was probably $150,000, $200,000 per employee. So you're going to see companies get bigger faster with fewer people. They're going to be able to train people faster because the machines are going to help. Mm-hmm. Some of the stuff you do, some of the stuff we do, all this is going to, get together to how do you make the humans the best they can be? And it's going to make, it's going to tie together at some point that it doesn't do yet, right? Where you're going to have, right now you have a bunch of little AI tools in a company, but at some point you're going to have the equivalent of ERP for AI, which is an AI that looks across your company and is optimizing all the submodels.
Right.
So it's
are you when you're kind of selling Talla to potential clients, do you get customers the VP of customer support basically freaking out that you're taking jobs away from his or her team?
Not usually. I would tell you the people that have sort of static orgs where they have 100 support reps, they typically don't reach out and say, how can we cut 20 jobs mm-hmm. or even redeploy these people? Some will. But more often than not, it's just that they're growing fast and they can't hire or it's too slow. And so they're always looking for how do we make the 50 people that we have more productive?
Yeah.
But I do think, one of the challenges with AI in companies at work has been that people aren't smart enough about AI people aren't smart enough about enough other industries yet, and those industries aren't smart enough about AI, that you don't have a lot of consultants who could go in and say, start here, fix this, apply AI here and there. So what happens is AI gets applied wherever you have the one VP who's very forward thinking.
Exactly.
I want to try this, right? And it's a big mess, and it fails, and then they go, AI, it's terrible. And the truth was they either just pulled off something that wasn't that economically viable and didn't matter, or maybe where they didn't have the data to be successful, or where the behavior change to get people to adopt it was too hard.
So last year we had a member of your team speak at our Emotion AI Summit.
Yep.
Our theme was Trust in AI on augmenting workplace intelligence. And so obviously customer support is one area, but can you speak to your views on where else could AI augment work?
I mean, yeah, I think it can touch almost every position, right? And it can do it in a couple of different ways. So I always have this framework that I give people that I call the PAC framework. Mm-hmm. And I realize it's confusing to somebody like you because there's a PAC algorithm, right? Probably approximately correct. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what I call predict, automate, and classify, because there's all these things AI can do. But I tell people, go piece by piece in your organization and think about what would I like to be able to predict, mm-hmm. what would I like to be able to automate, and what would I like to be able to classify, mm-hmm. and make a little matrix. And then go through, once you've got your matrix, because you've got every piece of the org, and then the other way you have the predict, automate, and classify, and you fill in your boxes, so you won't have something in every box. But then you look at it and you say, okay, of these things, where is the intersection of my most high value ROI thing, and then do I also have the data to do it? Because mm-hmm. you sort of need to figure those out. It's great to say, oh, we'd love to automate this thing, and you're like, we don't have the data set to do that.
Right.
Then you can at least think about how you might get it. So I think it's going to touch every piece of the org in those ways. You're going to automate away the boring piece of people's jobs. You're going to prompt them with predictions that they're going to want to think about. And so From an economics perspective, you think about, well, if prediction becomes cheap and automation becomes cheap, what skills go up in value, right? It's judgment, it's coordination, it's communication. I do worry sometimes about, particularly on the communication front, what I would call this like cascading, dwindling data set problem. So if you think about when I started Talla, right? LinkedIn had just launched their like equivalent of smart replies, which were just scripted. Mm-hmm. But so I got 77 replies, and like 73 of them had just hit the button and said, congrats on the new gig, congrats on the new gig, congrats on the new gig. And then like 4 people had written something like, hey, Rob, great to see you start something again, blah, blah, blah. So if you think about that, what would have happened before this is I wouldn't have gotten 77 because some people wouldn't have written anything. But the people that did, there would have been more variability. So maybe I got 15 that were all totally different, slightly different. We think about those 77 replies now versus the 15 replies from earlier being an input into another data set, a data set into a new algorithm, right? So you're going to see this like collapsing of and narrowing of language. And I wonder if Gmail Smart Reply will do that. Like, it's a really interesting problem. There are some downsides to it that could happen.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Actually, on that note, does Talla have any emotional intelligence? Should it?
Well, it's a great question. We don't yet, but people are asking for that, right? Because what people want, like the big trend that you see outside of automation, the big trend that you see in customer support is people are trying to consolidate systems so they know more about who's asking for support. Mm-hmm. So people are moving to like Salesforce Service Cloud because they have Salesforce CRM. So when somebody calls in, you know what they bought and who they are and everything else. So they want personalization. And we've seen that in the customer facing version of Talla. People want to personalize it a little bit to their brand, right? They want, they want their colors, they want their logos, they want it to look a certain way. They're going to want their voice at some point, right? People are going to want it to talk like Flow if you're progressive and whatever. And so I think the next iteration of that is going to be a level of personalization down to that person's emotion, right? Mm-hmm. And how they're feeling. And so it would be really interesting if customer comes to your website and they're looking for something. Right? Yeah. And you can tell by what they ask, particularly if you don't get it right the first time, how they respond. Right. You can tell a lot about their emotions and how to handle that. And you can have a whole stable of tools, whether you're prompting a live person or whether you're, teaching the tool to do it, but you can go in and deal with that. So I think that's definitely going to come.
That's awesome. All right. So this is not your first time being CEO.
No.
So what are like some of the key learnings from your first company that you've brought into Talla?
Never do it a second time. I ask myself all the time, like, why I did this again. It's interesting, right? Because the CEO job is not. It's the only role in the company. Like, it's very, very different in every company, right? Because you can build the executive team around the CEO. So if you have an outgoing, PR-centric, salesy CEO, you have a very operational team. If you have a very operational in-the-weeds CEO, then you need, an evangelist or whatever. Right.
What kind of CEO you are, by the way?
I think most people would say I'm probably a product evangelist CEO. Like I like to get out. It's been harder to do with Talla because there's a lot of people in the space. But like at Backupify, there were only 4 players, and really only 2 of us mattered, and so we were out, making noise in the press all the time, which was fun. And there were a lot of lessons learned. Culture matters. Like, you have to try to get that set and the rules of the game and what we're playing by. Hiring is hard. I think no matter how many people you hire, if you can ever get to the point where you're 65 or 70% successful in predicting how someone will perform when you hire them, like, you're doing really well. Right. So that's great. People, I always see first-time CEOs are like, I hired this head of sales and they didn't work out. And I'm like, join the club. I went through 3, right? Like, so these are the things that you learn. And then in particular, like, the job is just really, really relentless. Like, and I think this is one thing I always tell young people is as you climb an organization, and you sort of get to VP level in a big organization or C level at any organization, you get to the point where you will always have more work to do than you can do. And so you just have to get comfortable sometimes with dropping things or delegating things or saying, like, you're right, that is really important. I just can't get to it. So I'm sorry, because there are 5 things more important than that. So that's hard.
You do that, and you're also an angel investor.
Yes.
So say a little bit more about that.
So I love angel investing for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's very intellectually stimulating, right? You get to see what's coming. You get to see what people are working on. Number two, I really like the fact, obviously don't have a lot of time to help out the way a full-time venture capitalist would with the company, but I have had some unique experiences. I sat on the board of a company where I had to fire the CEO. I took money from a publicly traded company in a strategic round. So I went through that. It actually didn't turn out very well, but it can turn out great. And so I always tell the companies I invest in, like, don't call me to ask how to hire a CFO. Lots of people can tell you that. But if you have one of these experiences that's unique to me, call me. So I like when I can help out like that. I like when they send me term sheets and ask for advice.
Do you invest mainly in the AI space?
Mostly. So my 67 investments, probably 55 to 60 are in AI. Yeah.
What trends are you seeing?
Oh, there's a lot of interesting stuff. I love the human in the loop stuff and the stuff that's focused on annotation, right? Because that stuff is working a lot better than the people that try to, cram through everything with a new algorithm or something. I really love AI hardware. So I've invested in 3 chips. And
what are these chips doing?
So some of them are doing like inference at the edge, right? So one of the challenges, Mythic, right, which is one of the chips I'm invested in, has this, you have this issue of, if you want to put a big NVIDIA GPU in something, that might use 100 watts of power or whatever, like you can't put it in most devices. So if you want to move that to the edge, how do you do it? And they've got a lot of innovations, but one of the things that's happening with them and the industry in general is people are reviving some of these old analog circuitry technologies, how do you do, resistive addition, for example, with analog circuitry so that you can go off and do this fast and low power. Now, it's interesting because that has a separate problem sometimes, which is they can have really big footprints. So now space might be a problem because now it's low power, but you can't fit the chip on your board. So I'm an investor in a company called Rain Neuromorphics that actually has this idea of, every neuron doesn't necessarily need to connect to every other neuron, right? I don't know anybody in Egypt, but I know you and you know people in Egypt. So I bet I'm within 6 degrees connected to most people in Egypt somehow, right? And the brain works that way, right? Which is you have these clusters that are deeply connected and then you have these sparse connections between certain clusters. So Rain's idea was to basically lay down their traces that way. So that the neural networks could program up that way. People don't like it because it's stochastic, so it's actually not predictable. Okay. But it's also interesting from a security perspective because every chip's a little bit different. So
that's fascinating, yeah.
And then I'm an investor in the last one is called ConiQ, and they're embedding biological rat neurons into silicon. And the founder there believes that that's how you're really going to achieve intelligence is by merging biology and silicon.
So are most of these companies Boston-based? And do you have a view on Boston as an AI?
They're all over the place. So the Rain guys are in Redwood City now, but they came out of University of Florida. And that's where they did their PhD work. Mythic is in Austin, Texas is where they're based. Some of the teams in San Francisco. ConiQ is in Berkeley. I don't have I think if you're a first-time CEO, the Valley is the easiest place to raise money because there's so much of it and the network is great. But, if you're more senior and you've been there, you've been around the block, I think you could probably do it with going there a handful of times a year. There's a lot of people that think I live there because I've been there. I'm there enough and they run into me on the street. So I don't know that it matters. And most of the Valley's a hard place to scale a company these days. So I'm an investor in a company where
because of talent.
Yeah. Because Uber and Facebook and Google, they suck up all the talent.
Very competitive.
And it's so expensive. Right. So the model now is your management team's in Silicon Valley. Your sales and engineering team is anywhere else, right? Utah, Salt Lake City, Atlanta, Chicago. I have a company that is, the management team's in San Francisco and the rest of the company's in New Hampshire. And so I think you're seeing more and more of that. And so as those talent pools get built up in other places, because the thing is, if you need to scale an engineering team from 20 people to 200 people in 18 months, there's only a handful of people that have done that, right? And even in Boston and New York, there's still only a handful of people that have done that. There's a lot of people in Silicon Valley that have done it. And they know the roadblocks you're to hit. And that's what you're buying when you use the talent there.
Yeah. So what percentage of your portfolio companies are women founded?
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but at one time when I looked at the data, probably 8 or 9 months ago, it was above 40%. And as I tell a lot of people, I have nothing against Stanford and MIT, they're great schools, or Google and Facebook, they're good places to work. But your traditional model of like two white guys, undergrad at MIT, master's at Stanford, go to Google, go to Facebook, start a company. Like, I only have a handful of companies that fit that profile. So my portfolio is very diverse from a gender perspective and an ethnic perspective, because what I've found is I'm very drawn to founders that have gone through hard things in their lives. So I'm particularly drawn to immigrant founders, because when you talk to somebody and it's like, why are you here? And they're like, well, my dad was a political prisoner and we had to like flee and whatever. And it's like, you're going to do fine with the stress of a startup, right? So, so I'm really drawn to that. Yeah.
That's awesome. So if you had one takeaway for the audience listening today, especially young talent who are maybe looking to start their own AI companies, what advice would you give them?
So if you're starting an AI company, I would advise you that it's going to take a little bit longer than starting a SaaS company. SaaS ruined a generation of investors and their perspective on companies, because it was fast to deploy. It was just easy. You just get up and going. And it was super targeted, right? The whole idea was, man, don't buy these big monolithic systems that you have to buy servers for and everything else. You just pick off a job and you build a SaaS tool for that job and you sell it to that person. And now you have the opposite problem, which is companies are like, wow, we have 200 SaaS applications in the org, and they don't coordinate, and they don't talk, and they don't integrate well, and we don't share data across them. So AI, because you have this data problem, sometimes you have workflow behavior change for what you're trying to do. Like, do you need your users to give you feedback to label the data? They're not used to that. They're not used to probabilistic outputs, right? They're not used to their work being like a weather report of like, we're 94% certain, whatever. Right. What do you do with that? So I think those things take a little bit of time. And in addition to sort of product market fit, you have this model market fit they talk about, which is can you get the data and do the thing you were trying to do? Maybe not. Maybe you get down the path and people love your product, but it's, you have to pivot because of the data that you have. So there's interesting issues there. So raise a little more money, take a little more time, because that's...
Pick the right investors.
Yeah.
For more patient.
Yeah, you've been through this, right? Like, it's you guys have been around a long time, and the only thing that you know for sure is that you're going to have rough patches, and so you want investors who are sort of committed and will carry you through that.
Absolutely. So one question we ask of all our guests: if your car could do one thing in the future to make your life a little easier, what would it be?
Ooh, you know what it would be for me? So I'm not a fan of self-driving cars because I get very car sick. Okay. So when you say, hey, the car's going to drive itself, it's like, I'm still just going to sit there and look out the window. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to watch TV. I'm going to get sick. So if that car could fix that problem and not make me car sick, that would be amazing.
We actually get asked to build a nausea classifier, which we don't have enough data to train with it, so maybe we'll come back to you for that.
Yeah, drive me down some curvy roads and watch my face. Oh.
Yikes. All right, we're on it. All
right,
thank you so much. Thank you for making time.
Rana and Rob had a great conversation on augmenting the human workflow. His point on AI tools giving people superpowers really resonated with me. His example comparing AI's impact on our cognitive abilities to that of a construction worker being able to lift 400 pounds instead of 100 safely without injuring their back was really powerful. He further goes on to predict that companies will get bigger, faster, with fewer people, as AI will constantly be working on making the humans the best they can be. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to check out Talla's podcast, AI at Work, featuring Rob's interview of Rana. It's their 50th episode titled Humanizing Technology with Affectiva's CEO Rana el Kaliouby. Please also subscribe to Affectiva's Human-Centric AI podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes. We are also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Affectiva to share any feedback you have on the show, and weigh in on the discussion using hashtag AffectivaAsks. Don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to help us make the podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.